What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome back to the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game. My name is Augie Johnston, and I'm here with my partner, Alex Engel, and we hope you're able to take something away from today's episode that helps you in your basketball journey. Today, we're going to be talking all about subbing and the strategies behind subbing. So we hope you stick around for the whole episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe there. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, you can subscribe there as well. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into today's episode. All right, you guys, we're talking about subbing today. It's kind of a weird topic, I guess. Not one that's not X's and O's. It's not, player development. It's something that all coaches have to do, and it's actually a super challenging thing. So hopefully we can shed some light on the topic and learn from each other today. So let's go ahead and just get right into this, Coach. Let's start with, kind of the first step in subbing is just deciding your starting lineup. It's not really subbing, but it's, picking the players to start the game off for you. So how do you pick your starting lineup?
For me, I like to use a preseason as kind of the barometer for that. I know that sometimes coaches will mix through a lot of different lineups in the first couple games if you have a lengthy preseason. And I understand that to an extent, but for me, I really like to have my starting lineup dialed in by our first game. And I do that through competitions in the preseason, whether it's getting live scrimmages in or if you're able to maybe get some fall ball in, some games, some real games against other teams, stuff like that. Those are good ways. Now, I do understand that as those first games go along, maybe who you thought was going to perform really well in a real game could change and your starting lineup could change. And I think we're probably going to talk more about that later. But yeah, for me, it's just the preseason practices and the competition against each other and see who my top five are that come out of that competition.
Yeah, I think that it's tricky to pick a starting lineup due to the fact that they're positions, right? You got to make sure that you fill the positions. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Like for me, one tough decision that I've faced in the past is your five best players might all be big men, or your five best players might all be guards. And so you're like, okay, well, how can I plug these players in the right way to create a good starting lineup that, might not have all five best players, or, you might need to switch some stuff up and say, okay, if all my five best players are guards, maybe this year we're playing small ball or maybe a different kind of offense or something. But yeah, I think that preseason is super important. And that's kind of been a tricky thing for COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have a preseason. Our first game was a league game. And so like for me right now, I'm still kind of in the process of getting that dialed in. Like also for me, like I'm big on like opportunities. I don't want to count somebody out before they've had the chance. So I'm more about keeping players on their toes and switching up starting lineups as the season goes. But definitely a lot of time goes into choosing those starting lineups. So that just brings me into my next question. So do you ever change starting lineups? Like I guess last year, did you ever change starting lineups, or was it dialed in all year?
No, actually, we changed quite a few times. I had a lineup that I went with, and then the first couple games, I felt like a couple players weren't really performing the way they should have. And that's one of the most interesting parts about practice to games, and what people don't understand is, when the lights go on in a game, some people rise and some people don't. And if you're a player that does well in practice, but he doesn't perform in games, it's going to be hard to put you on the floor, and I think we've mentioned this in the past, like with open gyms, the people that play really well in open gym and then they get to a real game situation, they don't perform. It's that kind of same idea. So last year I had a couple players that we started the season with, and then by the time a few games went by, I felt like players were playing better off the bench. They were giving more effort and more energy, and they were basically producing almost the same, so I was like, okay, I'm going to give them an opportunity. I actually went and changed and put some of those bench players in and then had them play a few games, and that kind of like motivated the original starter, and they actually ended up taking it back over a few games later. But probably, I don't know, 6-7 games into that preseason, I had it dialed in, and then from there on out, the rest of the season I didn't change it.
Nice. Yeah, for me, like last year, I feel like I changed a little bit, but I made one player change in the whole season, but it was pretty much the same starting lineup last year. But this year, I think it's going to be a lot different. But it is so weird how, some players are so good in practice, but in the games, they might not be as good. Or some players are really good off the bench. Like there's some players where you're like, hey, you could start and be this good, or you could come off the bench and be this good and help us so much more. And it's just kind of like a weird dynamic, I guess, that some players have. So, okay, cool. So let's start talking a little bit more about strategy and stuff. So subbing, like when is normally your first sub? Do you have it kind of planned out where like, yeah, normally I sub around this time, or is it kind of random?
It's, I would say, like somewhat planned, where I'm usually thinking by the end, towards the end of the first quarter, I'm going to make a sub. And I normally know generally who I'm probably subbing for at that time. But again, it is still kind of random, because it's not like, all right, we're at the 1:30 mark, I got to take this person out. It's like, okay, we're 2-3 minutes left in the first, maybe 1 minute even. I might make a sub, but I got to kind of feel it out too. And who that person could be could change, right? Like if you get in foul trouble, like last game actually, I had a player get into foul trouble with 3 or 4 minutes left in the first quarter. So it's like, you got to come out. You had 2 fouls. I can't play you anymore. But typically outside of that, yeah, generally a couple minutes left, I like to get a subs in, because then they're on the court for a minute or two and you're going into the quarter. So if things go well with the subs, you finish strong. But if things aren't going well, you're like, I got 1 minute left and we get a quarter break, so it's kind of a nice time for myself to get a couple people in there.
Is it normally is it normally one player coming in? Is it normally, or is that random?
Kind of, I would say normally 1 to 2. I know we're going to break into this maybe a little bit later, but I'm personally not a coach that likes having a ton of subs on the court at the same time. And I'm not saying I could never do it, but the teams that I've had, my 10th player is not equal to my first player. So I just can't put all 5 in at the same time. So I like to balance it out a little bit more. So usually I'd say 1 to 2 players are coming in at that 1 or 2 minute mark in the first quarter.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical. And I fall in line with that too. This year we have a pretty balanced team. I'm able to do, if I want to, 3 players in that first sub. I can send in 3 players and there's really no drop off. We have, 2 players that normally play, a good majority of the game. So it works out nicely that way. But yeah, I think that's a good point you made about the, 2 minutes left in the first quarter, 1 minute left in the first quarter. Make that sub. That gives those guys a nice little break, plus the quarter break. Plus, like you said, if they make that run, then maybe those players stay in longer and finish out the
Mm-hmm.
half. Who knows? Okay. So how do you sub by positions? Or when you're subbing, are you subbing point guard for point guard, big for big? Or let's say you do have, or are you going into your like 6th best player, 7th best player? How does that work?
So it depends, I would say, sometimes year to year, but this year we have a pretty like, I guess you could say multifaceted team, where like I have players that can play multiple positions. Okay. My starting 3 can play the 2, but she can also play the 4. And so generally when I make that first sub, or if I start to make some subs, I might slide her from the 3 to the 4, and we're a little smaller with that unit, but then I can like throw in 2 guards and we can go, like 3 little quick guards. She's kind of like a hybrid, and then a 1 post player. And we can go be a pretty quick team on the floor. I've had in the past where you go position for position, where you're like, okay, this one's going to take this spot, this one's going to take that spot. But I've found that generally, most teams, it doesn't line up like that. Usually you have guys that can, or girls that can play multiple spots, and you're kind of mixing and matching. I would say the spots that generally are staying the same, again, not always, but generally are usually your point guards and your 5. But like 2 through 4, I feel like there's a lot of, fluidity in there, especially if you have players that can play multiple spots.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, like for me, what I like to do a lot of times is if I sub guys out, maybe I leave in my point guard, let's say, and then later he's going to get tired. So on the second sub, I'll have like my 2-man come in and run the point. So like that's a time where, unless you have, multiple point guards that can go, but that's a time where I can say, okay, now my 2 guard, who's kind of like a combo guard anyways, could go and play the point. That'll give him a rest. That lets me put a starter back in. And that works nicely for me. But what you said about the whole position for position thing, I remember when I was grad assistant in college, he really subbed position for position. And the reason was because we had so many sets, we had so much stuff that like you had to learn pretty much one position. It was hard to learn multiple because you couldn't learn all these, different plays and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
The problem with it was though, is he would sub out our 5-man, our 5-man would get in foul trouble. Right. And so we'd sub him out and then sub in the backup 5, but the backup 5-man was like the 10th best player on our team, but everyone's, because everyone's got a backup. He's got a backup. He's got a backup. He was getting in the game like first 5 minutes sometimes when the guy would pick up 2 fouls and that guy was playing the rest of the first half. And everyone on the bench is like, killing this guy every day, man. How is this guy playing over me? And it was just, I think was part of some of our issues that year. But
And I do think for my personal philosophy is like, you want to get the best players on the floor at all times, and I get it's not a perfect science because like you said, sometimes your best player might be your 6-man or your 7th man, but like you have to play a post. You can't play if your 6-man is like a point guard or a shooting guard, you can't put them at the 5, obviously. But generally you can a lot of times find a way to, switch things around and hide it or push someone down, play a little smaller or something, and you still get your best players on the floor. And I feel like you're more likely to be successful than just being like, well, the 5 is going in for the 5 and that's it.
Yeah. And like you said, you can always push players down, right? So let's say you want to put in a point guard and take out your 5-man on the first sub. Well, that's not really a problem. Normally your 4 becomes your 5, your 3 becomes your 4. So that's what we do a lot of times too. So, okay. Let's see. So you talked about making a sub around that end of that first quarter, and I'm pretty much the same on that too. What about halftime? Who's coming out at halftime? Does that differ or is that normally the same?
I rarely switch at halftime unless one player is just completely outperforming like the other player. If it's a huge margin, if my starter's 0 points playing, really poorly, just hurting the team badly, and I got someone off the bench that scored like 10, 12 points in the first half, I may say, okay, I'm going to sub and switch that out. But I'm going to be honest, that hasn't happened a whole lot. So I'm willing to do it, but there really has to be a large disparity for me to switch the lineups at halftime.
Yeah. And I'm the same with that too, but I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong. I think maybe that's something to explore, is coming out at halftime with maybe a little bit different of a lineup or something, but because I don't really see unless you have clear cut starting 5 better than all the other players. But a lot of teams, it's pretty gray area between your 6th, 7th man and any starter, a lot of times. So, but yeah, I'm the same. I come out with the same starters, but I think that's something that should be explored maybe a little bit more. Have you ever seen other teams mix that up?
Not a whole lot, but I
Yeah,
think
me
the
neither.
main reason why is because you could be destroying your starter's confidence. And if I guess it's more, to me, it's more of like a long-term thing. Like, yeah, that one game, maybe that gets you farther, but if that hurts your starter's confidence and then they start going down the other way, you could lose them and their performance in the long run as well. And I know some people would say, well, maybe they shouldn't be starting then, but I don't know. I just think that that's what most coaches are afraid of. At the end of the day, we really are coaching not just their skills, but we are coaching their confidence and their ability to play. So if you, every time someone performs a little better than your starter, you take them out, they're not going to feel real comfortable. They're going to feel like, oh, I got to kill every half. Otherwise I'm going to come out at halftime. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's important to have that communication. I know I do. Like when we switch our starting lineup, unless it's because somebody's outperforming somebody. But normally a lot of times, like I said, it's just to give other guys opportunities, because there's a lot of times where I'm not 100% sure that I have the 5 best, normally I do, but not always. And so, sometimes, like I said, I'm just giving another guy an opportunity. He had a great game the night before. The other guy had just an okay game. I'll tell him, hey, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just, this guy's going to get the opportunity. The team we're playing small, so we need to go a little bit smaller to be able to match up on them. And that's just what it is. But, it's hard for players to, accept that, it's confidence wise. Okay. So how deep do you go into your bench? I mean, how many players are you normally playing?
Normally, I would say my top 8 get most of my minutes. 9 and 10 will probably get in for some spot minutes here and there. There are times where they don't get in, but generally speaking, they would get in for a couple spot minutes just to give someone a break real quick. But I would say my top 8 are normally going to play the majority of my time.
Yeah, and that's same with me. I think someone's in foul trouble. All right, well, now that 9th guy is probably going to get a look, or somebody twists their ankle in practice, not playing. All right, well, that bumps up that 9th guy. Or maybe we're pressing the whole game and it's just super fast paced and guys are giving me one of these, I need a break. Well, then that might open up the door for, 9 or 10 to get in a little bit more of that game too. But yeah, I think it just depends on your team. I've played for teams where it's 10 deep. I've played for teams where it's 6 deep, so I think it just kind of depends on your team. But
And
there
that's
is, I was just going to say, into the rhythm, right? If you are getting yanked out every 2 minutes, it's hard to kind of get that rhythm unless you're used to that, because I've played in like these run and gun systems where you only do play for 2 minutes because you're pressing and running and playing fast. But yeah, there's some sort of rhythm factor for sure.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is when you're playing eight, because if you're thinking about mathematically, you're like, okay, well, there's 5 people on the court. So if you're playing eight, you're only getting 3 people off the bench, obviously. That's where you really got to know how you're subbing, and that subbing pattern becomes important, because if you're going to be playing 8 players, you're never going to have a time where all 5 starters are resting, at the same time. So you've got to find a way to like get those 2 in, 2 out, get them a couple minutes break. Then, it's like a revolving door. You're always having someone of those top 8 resting. And that's where it's important to have that sub pattern really down. And it's not as easy. I think maybe if someone's listening and they're like, oh, subbing, like that seems like a weird subject. Why would you talk about that? You just sub people in and out. And I'm telling you, like, experienced coaches, maybe for you guys it's easy, but for someone who's newer to it or someone who just hasn't done it a whole lot, and even for some experienced coaches, I think it's not as easy to get a sub pattern down. It's really easy to screw it up and to forget. And I know I had to always tell my assistant coaches, like, hey, make sure you're watching this and remind me if you see this, or if I forget to get this person in, or if so-and-so's tired, because when you're coaching the game, you're watching like what's going on in the game. You're running your sets, you're calling stuff, you're, this, that, and the other. Sometimes you forget, like, oh man, my top player hasn't came out for 25 minutes. Like they're tired, and they're going to die at the end of the game if they don't get a couple minutes break.
Yeah. And I think with that said, it's good to get out your best player, maybe for a short one in the first half and then a short one in the second half. I like to take them out like end of the third and give them that break so they have some energy for the fourth. But okay. Yeah. Oh, I was going to add one more thing. And I mean, like it's subbing, right? Subbing pattern. You're looking for guys that are tired. You're looking to make sure you have good lineups. Oh, they're in zone. You might want to put in shooters, or they're whatever. You might want to put in bigs. But also kind of the next level, I think, is matchups, right? Like how can you, and that's one thing that we're working on this year a lot, is because if we can ever get the big guy on their team to guard one of our best players who's actually a guard, that's what we want, right? And then we can get him on the perimeter. So we try to get those matchups set up if we can during the games. I have assistant coaches looking for that. And also vice versa. If we can put a lineup out there that puts a small on him and then put him in the post, then that's another lineup that we want to use. So that's like a whole next like chapter of subbing, is looking for matchups. Defensively too, right? I mean, if some guy's killing you, you might go to the bench and get your best defender,
Right.
and put him in the game too. So there's just so much to subbing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So do you have like any different types of lineups or like special lineups, or do you have like I guess just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I got my Golden State Death lineup, and the all small. No, we do actually have a small lineup. Yeah, I would say so. At my starting lineup is my 4 and my 5 are more traditional, like post. My 5 is more of a traditional post. My 4 is like, I guess you could say she's not a stretch, but she can shoot it, but she still prefers to be around the basket. The nice thing is I'm fortunate that both of them, like even my 5, can actually handle the ball a little bit. But that lineup is bigger. Like that's where I'm running, basically almost 2 posts, you could argue, right? But then I have lineups where I'll pull one out and put the other one at the 5, and we'll go small, and we'll go like 3 guards basically. And like I told you, my 2 or my 3, my starting 3 can play the 4. So we'll go small ball lineup. And I've even had one where I'm working with one of my shooting guards to just learn the 4, like really just the basics of the 4, and go 4 guards in a post, because we actually have the depth off the bench. Like my 7, 6, 7, 8 are all guards, and they can play. Like it's like kind of like you said, like they would probably start for quite a few teams if they weren't playing behind some of the players they are right now. So that's something that we're kind of exploring with. I have lineups last year and probably the same this year that like I press with more because they're a little smaller, and so I can get to fly around the court a little bit better with those teams. So yeah, I definitely have a few different lineups that I run.
Yeah, that's a good point about the pressing lineup, going big, going small, and yeah, like I said, we do the same thing. We try to if we can get the big on our shooter, then we can go small. If we can get a guard on him, then we can put him in the post. And the teams that do best against us are the teams that have like a athletic three man that can guard him, and then it's kind of like, oh, it's kind of a wash, he's on the
Hmm.
perimeter, but he's got an athletic three on him. Put him inside, he's got an athletic three on him. So that's when we really got to kind of figure stuff out. And we also have a lineup that we haven't used, but it's like a shooting lineup. Like we actually have like we could probably put five guys on the well, we might be able to put five guys on the court that could that are all pretty good shooters. And
Hmm.
so we're just kind of waiting for the day to where team's just going to play zone the whole game, and we're going to try to test that out.
Hmm.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about players coming off the bench. Is there any kind of ways, to make sure that they contribute, or just talk a little bit about the challenges of coming off the bench, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges of coming off the bench are one, finding a way to contribute. Like that is, I think, the major challenge is like, how do I come off the bench? I know I'm not going to play as much as a starter, so how do I contribute the most with my minutes? And most people think I have to score coming off the bench, and you do want to have some scoring options for sure. But I think one of the key things is just talking to players and letting them know like what their role is. If you're coming off the bench and you're my eighth man or whatever, or ninth man, and you're a big, I may say, hey, I just need you to play defense and to rebound. And if you score on top of that, that's just a bonus, and that's going to get you maybe a little more minutes. But if you play defense and rebound, like you're going to get in every game and you're going to play. And you got to have that, figure that out with, what player does what. One of my players this year who I was kind of playing at the point and the two off the bench. And she's really more of like she's more comfortable just being a pure scorer, and she could actually be a pretty good scorer off the bench. And so just recently we had a talk, and I'm like, you know what? You're not going to take any reps at the point anymore. I just want you playing the two, and that's it. Because we have, I thankfully this year have the luxury of having basically 3 point guards and her as like a fourth point guard,
Mm.
which is strange because last year I had basically 1 point guard and I had a combo guard, and that was it. Nobody else could play the point. So it's kind of a weird dynamic. Now I got a bunch of guards, which is nice. But yeah, so I told her, hey, just all you got to work. And you could see she like literally looked at me and she like relaxed and she's like, oh, thank you. Like, I'm so happy for that, and we'll see how it plays out, but I think it's going to help her because now when she comes in, all she has to worry about is, hey, just play defense and take your shots when you're open. Don't worry about running the team or any of that. So I think finding a role that works for your players is a good way, because confidence is really important with bench players. I mean, it's important with anybody, but I know for myself as a player who for quite a few years, in my first 3 years in college, came off the bench. It was hard to find like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Like, how do I earn more minutes? How do I help the team win? And if you don't have a coach that sits down and talks with you about it, it can be confusing, I think, sometimes for players.
Yeah, that what you said at the end there makes a lot of sense. Confusing. You don't know if should you come out and be aggressive and gun, should you come out and pass up and not shoot, and pass up open shots. Like you just don't. Players don't know, so you just don't know what your coach wants. For me, I see the rhythm of the game. Like the game starts and everyone's all aggressive. It's all, everyone's playing super hard. And then there's like that lull where like players start to get tired. They kind of start to fall in. Like this player might start off the game picking up full court every time. But then after the second quarter starts, you don't see it again for the rest of the game. Like for me, that's when I want to sub and I want that player to come in that's off the bench and then try to lift our team back up to that same level that we started the game. And that's really all I need from my bench guys when they come in is like, don't let us get into that lull. Like keep up the intensity. And for me, it's defense. Like if you come off the bench and you start playing really good defense, then you'll probably stay on the court. Obviously, it's great if you come in and score, but if you come in and score, it doesn't mean I'm not going to take you out and put in that starter again who has been starting all year, unless that starter was having a bad game. But yeah, I mean, but if you come in and play defense and start locking down their player that was just dominating us, like we're down by 5. Oh, okay, sub, put this guy in, and now, we're up by 5. That's what's going to keep you in the game and get
Mhm.
you more playing time.
And one of my coaches used to always say, bench, I don't need you to improve where we're at. I need you to just hold the status quo. Like if we're up by 7, when I put you in, you need to make sure we don't go down. We need to stay up by 7. If you improve the score, that's just a plus, but at least maintain where we're at. And I think that's another thing. And like you said, just bringing that high energy and aggressiveness, and bench players just understanding that you can be a really effective player just by playing defense, and that you can get a lot of minutes just by doing that. It's not always about scoring.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So what about 5 in, 5 out subbing? That's where, if anybody doesn't know what that is, that's where you sub 5 guys in the game at one time and take all 5 out. Have you ever seen that? And what are your thoughts on that?
I've definitely seen it. When I coached junior college, Fresno City was famous for doing that. Um, there are teams, even in high school, I think some of the teams in the Valley sometimes will do that because they kind of trickle down effect from that. Uh, Personally, not a fan of it. Don't like it at all. Never liked it as a player. Don't like it as a coach. It goes back to that rhythm you were talking about earlier in the episode. I don't feel like you can get a rhythm with that. Knowing that I could have just played and just scored 10 points in a row and it doesn't matter. My coach is going to take me out. I just don't like that at all. I know teams are effective with it, but I don't think for most teams it's effective. And I think even the best teams, like generally, it's better when you have a good rhythm going. So yeah, personally, not my favorite.
I do agree with the rhythm part of it, but I'm not opposed to it as a coach. As a player, I obviously didn't like it because, and I played on one team overseas where, like I said, we were running gun, so we did do that. But it interests me because for the same reason that we just spoke about, can we put in a new 5 that is as good as the starters, and can they, because they are fresh, can they keep the level of intensity up? And I've actually never done it personally, but it's not something that I'm opposed to doing. And I came into this season even thinking, I might do that. But what I've come to realize is you can kind of have the same effect by just putting in 3 players, right? So I might be able to just, instead of going 5 in, 5 out, I can go 3 in, 3 out, leave in, maybe the 2 guys that I know for sure can contribute, and then those 3 players that just came out, I can easily take 2 of those guys and put them right back in for the 2 players that have been going the whole time that are exhausted. And it's the same effect. We still have that high level,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I do agree the rhythm, it's tough. But if you're subbing out players that aren't really big time scorers and stuff like that in those 3, then I really don't see there being too much drop off.
Yeah, I guess if you had a team where 10 deep, you were pretty similar, if you didn't have a big disparity, maybe it could work. Let's take the rhythm and not even look at that. Let's just talk about technicality. Yeah, if they're all similar in ability, it could work. But I think most teams, you got 1 or 2 players at least that are just stand out above the others. And it's like, well, am I going to put in my 10th man for the same amount of time as my starting first best player? I don't know if the payoff is going to be there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And like we said earlier, right, most teams are 8 players deep, and I, in watching The Last Chance U, like a few weeks ago, that show on Netflix, he was talking about that too. You really only want to play 8 players, he said. And he's like, right now, we don't even know who our 8 are because they were so talented, and they had so many guys. So they were trying to figure that out too. And I'm definitely in that position this year too, where I really don't know. Like, I know who my starters are, and we have them mapped out and stuff, but next week it could change. Like, there could be a good week of practice. Someone else could have a good game, good practices, get the opportunity, and they could take someone's spot.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of how you do want it. You do want to keep your starters on their toes a little bit without crushing their confidence.
Definitely. Because if they get complacent and they know nobody's challenging them, or say if they know nobody's challenging them, then they get complacent and they're like, well, nobody's going to take my spot, so I can slack off. Right. Good, really great players won't do that. But most people, it's kind of the nature of human beings is we're like, well, I'm secure in my spot, so why should I keep working hard?
Cool. One or 2 more questions before we wrap this up. One that just kind of popped into my head randomly is subbing for when players make mistakes. And this is a really hard thing as a coach. So you got a player out there, he throws a turnover. You just bite your lip. You're like, all right, it's okay. It's okay. Then he misses a help side assignment on defense. And you're like, and then he comes down and takes a terrible shot. Are you pulling him out, or what are you doing?
So it depends. Like what you described, potentially, yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan of like the one turnover yank people. I know some coaches are real strict. I don't like that at all. I think again destroys confidence personally, my opinion. But if you're taking, you're turning the ball over and then you're not playing defense and then you're not boxing out, and it's like, okay, you didn't. To me, I'm like, you didn't even come ready to play. Because if you throw a turnover, but then you're like, oh, I'm boxing out hard, I'm playing hard defense, I'm making it up. Like, okay, yeah, I can work with that. But you've got to, if you're just doing nothing on both ends, then yeah, in my head, I'm like, you didn't show up today like you really were ready to play. You just showed up, and just thought, whatever, it's just another day. So yeah, that scenario, yes, but I'm not like super strict about that. And most of the time, I find that my players, if they're making mistakes, they'll try to make it up on the other end, because I try and drive that into their heads. Like, hey, if you make a mistake, get it back. So mostly I don't have a huge issue with that, but I've definitely had players where I'm like, I put you in a minute later, I'm like, nope, see, you're not ready today. Like, we'll find somebody else.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to the level of trust, right? Like some players, you have a lot of trust in them. So if they do throw a turnover and make a couple of mistakes in a row, you're like, okay, that's pretty rare. That happened, but that doesn't normally happen. When other players, you see it time and time again in practice. You're constantly telling them, hey, no middle, force baseline. You're constantly telling them, hey, jump stop in the paint, and they never do. And then they go out there in the game and then they don't do it. And then you're just like, I can't trust you.
Right.
You've not shown me that you are not going to, make those mistakes. So that's for me when it gets frustrating. But one thing that I'm trying to do, because we keep talking about confidence, right, is let's say a player throws a turnover or two or whatever, makes some mistakes. I'm like, I got to get him out. Instead of like yanking him right when he throws the turnover, I'll like let him go up and down one or two more times and then yank him out, because then it doesn't seem like as bad for his confidence and stuff. Like, hey, so like if he throws a turnover and you just yank him out or whatever, the next time he goes in the game, he's gonna be like playing scared, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
gonna be like, oh, if I throw a turnover, I'm gonna get pulled. Oh, I can't, he won't be aggressive. But if you kind of disguise it, I think it helps a little bit. So that's one thing that I'm trying to do, but it's hard.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have the luxury of letting them go up and down one or two more times. One or two more times could be the end of the game, right? You're like, oh, but yeah, I get where you're coming from with that, and I don't think that's a bad idea. But it's just, if you have that luxury to let them go one or two more times, sure, but it's not always that simple, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if they're continuing to make mistakes, then that's just bad coaching, right? You got to get them out
Right.
if they're just not ready to play. So,
Right.
all right. Is there any other strategies or any other little ideas you have about subbing before we go ahead and wrap this up in a minute?
I just think, as we've kind of talked about before, like you got to figure it out. You got to feel it out every year, depending on what team you have. You may sub one year a certain way, and you may sub a different way, another year, because you have different personnel, or maybe a better team, or maybe a worse team talent wise. So you've got to find what works for you. But the main thing is just, you want to give players confidence, as much as you can. And it doesn't mean you can't tell them when they do stuff wrong. It doesn't mean you can't, pull them for making mistakes, but if the leash is so short that they feel like they're afraid anytime something happens, they're going to be subbed, I think you breed a lot of fear into your team. And I just think that's personally not a great way to win games and to have a successful program.
Yeah, totally agree with that. All right. That's all we got for this week, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like today's episode and you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, you can subscribe there as well. We come out with a new episode once a week, and we hope to see you guys in the next one.
Peace.